Good afternoon, everybody. Now it's time to start our session. First of all, welcome to CTBUH conference. And today we have four famous speakers. Their research field is around the tall building and the I hope we have a very productive time this afternoon, and we don't have much time. So Mr. Jan Clerks will introduce four speakers briefly, and then we start the session. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Jan Clerks. People who know me, they know that if you give me a microphone in a public, I'm going to be talking about the fact that I live in Marina City, and this is just a very brief introduction into the topic of the session. The building I live in allows me to live, which I think, a very sustainable lifestyle. It's right in the heart of Chicago, and therefore I don't need a car. I can bike. I live in a building with a lot of apartments, which allows me to have a very low utility bill. And I get around in the city, I walk, I do everything. And that's a little bit the topic of this session, urban sustainability, compact and green. You know how they say in America that we always save the best for last. And I think it's certainly true when it goes for this session, when we have four excellent speakers who are going to inform you about this topic. I'm from the Netherlands, and coincidentally, the first speaker of this session is from the Netherlands as well. Now, the Netherlands means the Low Countries, so you would not expect very tall buildings in this country. But actually, I think there are. I think we're a pretty country when it comes to tall buildings, especially in Rotterdam, where you really have a skyline embodying the modern ambitions of the city. Also, pretty close to Rotterdam is a technical university of Delft, which for 15 years, I've been saying it correctly, have been doing a tall building workshop, allowing international students to come to Delft and work on a practical project that actually has to be able to be realized. And one of the persons who is involved with this workshop is our first speaker, Mr. Peter de Jong. He is a lecturer on building economics, real estate and housing. And I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Peter de Jong.
Thank you very much for this nice words. You're all welcome. And immediately I have to disappoint you. The story was about density, form and performance, but I'm afraid I have to retitle it into something like a long life learning, because I changed it completely. I was planning to talk about Rotterdam, of course, which is the high-rise city in the Netherlands. And well, thanks to Jan Clerks, every city in the Netherlands, every small town, every village does have its own statement on vision on high-rise. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's worthless, but it becomes very harsh if they are telling the wrong things. And the renewed vision statement of Rotterdam is asking for even more slender buildings than we already have. And by that and some other reasons, we have been building for vacancy the last 7 years, about from 7 million square meters offices, 6 million have been pulling vacancy out of the older buildings. And of course, due to the economic crisis, the whole high-rise tall buildings ID in Rotterdam is more or less on a hold at the moment. And in order to find ways to talk to these urban planners, I was thinking about, well, I skipped this one because I'll come later to that one. I was thinking about finding weapons to defeat them with their own thinking, and that is, for most of all, a visual approach of density. So my starting point is this thesis from Meta Berghaus, Pont and Per Haupt, in which they describe density in all kind of urban characteristics. You see the websites in which you can find the thesis and download the tool. And this brings these kind of graphs in which you can find all kind of relations between urban density, between floor space indexes and other points, building blocks, types of building. And of course, if I do such a thing, I have to go over all the definitions of the characteristics. And then you can see what is coming out of it, the relation between quality and blocks, and the relation between floor space index, or the FAR, as you call them mostly, and the ground space index. But then again, doing such, you can add more to these kind of graphs by putting well, colors to it, giving a kind of performance, and the size of the bullets would mean that you could immediately give the fat buildings, for instance, in my case, to this graph. Using a database we worked with, in this case in Amsterdam, and looking at the information from one side from the land register and the other side of Google Views, you can, with some help of Visual Basic macros, you can create this kind of graphs. And you already see that there is, well, two things in this preliminary results, that you can see that highly urban is doing quite well. In the graph on the right, you can see that for this higher buildings, tall buildings, I have to redefine the graph because they're going to a floor space index of even 8. And then, of course, I have to give some economical background and some academical background, and tell you that the data at this point is not quite as good as it should be. But then again, I could parse that easily with, for instance, telling that you have lies and statistics, and I have to find the right data to get to the good lies. So the idea is still to work on this furthermore, and basically it's not really necessary because we know already that these higher buildings with the larger floor plans are performing much better than the others. So then I would come to the questions, but as I said, I skipped this kind of presentation because this first slide, or the third slide, that's what I was, where I was stuck. If you're talking about strong images, this is for me a very strong image. What you can see over here is, and you can read it for yourself, is the growth of the city of Amsterdam from 1400 until 2000. And what is happening over there is that it's not becoming a dense city, although many people think that the Netherlands is a very dense country, but basically you can see that it's by having a huge urban sprawl, and at the same time people are using much more space per person. It's a huge fall in density. So this means that we are in a long time ago there was indeed this huge density in this old city, and now it's dropped with significant numbers, even up to a factor 9. So why I'm stuck with this graph, I think there are a few ingredients of this last 2 days. They're going very fast. Being in such a big city as Seoul, well, one of the striking things is walking up and down from this center to the hotel is the smell of the city. That's the smell of a large city, properly. But also, for instance, talking to Steve Watts over breakfast about something with one of my colleagues. He was talking about factor 20. Factor 20 is meaning, in his sense, he's Annie van Dobbelsteen, sustainable office. Factor 20 means that we expected growth of the world population about a factor 2. The need of reducing the use of resources by a factor 2, but the hardest number is the equal wealth of the whole global population by a factor 5, meaning that we are not supposed to have our wealth in Western Europe, but this wealth should also go to countries in Africa, in Latin America, and so on. So this factor 5 is indeed the strongest factor in the whole story. And thinking about Seoul, for instance, and also thinking about the story about young clerks about living high, and a lot of people living in high-rise apartments. He was asking about how many people are living in high-rise apartments, and no, not many people responded, because we are living most of the time in even larger estates in the suburbia. But living in high-rise apartments of people, more or less one-person households, what would it mean to Seoul if you have such a growth of people? Also, this was also stipulated by the new chairman, Tim Johnson, who was referring to the fact that cities, at the moment, 50% of the total population is living in cities, and it will be growing to 75%. If you combine it with the idea that the total population is growing, that means in absolute numbers that a city like Seoul will triple in this period. So how can you put triple Seoul in this area? The other stories which were changing my subject were, of course, about sprawl, especially not really in cities like Seoul and Singapore, but the story about from Luis Diego Queiroz Pranchica and Teok Prasetyoado about the sprawl in Latin America, Costa Rica, for instance, and in Jakarta. And this sprawl means that, well, this problem is huge. We all can remember, of course, what is happening in London, where too many people are on the same place, resulting in these riots. And I suppose at the moment we are speaking here in Cairo, people are killing each other because they cannot live with each other anymore in these kind of groups. So that's quite another focus than talking about density of Rotterdam in your study room, and that's what I was learning over here. And well, how can we deal with it? Of course, we can learn a lot from the tall buildings approach, the innovative character of it. And there are many good things at the same time. For instance, the story from Ross Donaldson was talking about how to create the right programs in order to get to the better buildings. And with this factor 20, we have to reduce 95%. So we need these kind of programs, we need this kind of thinking. But at the same time, and was, of course, he was also explaining in the question period that due to standardization, due to commercial approach, it could take some time to bring this kind of software to the right people. Of course, he is right. He has to make a living of it. We all have to make our living of these kind of things. But at the same time, we are living on the edge, and so now and then somebody is falling off, like me. So basically, I have to go back, I suppose, to Delft and rephrase my research questions and rewrite everything I've been writing before. So I think that leaves a lot of time for questions, but I'm afraid I don't have the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.